Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Bright National Team's Bright Parent Learning Series. We're excited that you are watching this video, and we have a really incredible program today, which you're going to hear about in a little minute. We've got Alice Barber with us to talk about parenting your child when your child is experiencing bullying, excuse me. So we're really excited to learn from Alice and have Alice join us tonight. And just a quick reminder that the Bright National Team offers free parent programming to any parent, grades K through 12. We know we're all going through this together. We know it's rough out there. We need time together to learn and connect. And so every month, the Bright National Team is going to kick off the month with a learning series like tonight, a different topic each month. And so this month, the topic is bullying. So the first week of the month, we kick it off with a learning session, and we have someone who is really familiar with these topics in the community come and share their knowledge with us. And then we have a series of conversations with parents for the rest of that month. So the second week of the month, we have a conversation with parents of elementary age kids about that topic. So next week, we're going to have a parent conversation. So please join us if you're the parent of an elementary age kid and you want to have a further conversation together about what we learned today or just the topic of bullying in general. And there's both an East Coast friendly and a West Coast friendly time for that conversation. The third week of the month is a parent conversation that we have. Everyone's welcome for parents of middle or high school age kids. So again, on that same month theme of the month. So this week or the third week of this month, it will be, again, if you're the parent of a middle or a high school age kid and you want to talk to other parents about parenting when your child is experiencing bullying, please join us. Please join us. And the last week of the month is an affinity space for BIPOC parents. So if you want to have a parent conversation with other BIPOC parents in an affinity space around the theme of that month, please join us the last week of the month. So again, I'm going to pass it over. These are my fantastic teammates here on the national team, and we are all parents ourselves. We're all looking forward to connecting with you in all the different ways, learning together with you and having parent conversations. And so I'll pass it over to my colleague and teammate Lakeisha. We'll do some learning together. We'll have a little bit of Q&A, and then we'll wrap up and you'll hear more about what's to come in next month's theme. So I'll pass it over to you, Lakeisha.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Tonight, the speaker of the night is Alice Barber. She is a child therapist, registered art therapist, and holds a degree from Wellesley and Springfield colleges. She has been providing therapy to children in Western Massachusetts for over 25 years. Over that time, she has held roles in administration in local community mental health clinics. Currently, she works at a private practice in East Hampton as a consultant to elementary and preschools. She specializes in treatment of young children who have experienced trauma and is the author of Blue Butterfly Open Moments of a Child Therapy Practice. Most importantly, she is a mom. Please welcome Alice. Alice, the floor is all yours.
All right. So, hi everybody. So glad to be here tonight. I'm sorry that that this is a topic that we need to be talking about because it is difficult both as a parent or guardian and as the child who is either doing the bullying or is being bullied. And, you know, my hope is that there will come a day when we won't have to talk about this. But as such, here we go. So I'm going to share my screen with you. All right, so this is about parenting your child during and after they've been bullied. And I want to go over what to expect from this because this is a really charged topic for children and their parents and other grown-ups in their lives. I'm going to present for about 40 minutes and feel free to think of questions. This isn't actually live tonight, but I'm sure that your questions can be answered in the following groups the rest of this month. Take care of yourselves. Many of us have a history of having been bullied, and for some of us, the impact of this may have been traumatizing, meaning that the symptoms that were happening when you were being bullied yourself have stuck around long after the bullying stopped. And so those sorts of symptoms are things that you might not need anymore, but they come about and they stick around for much longer. We're going to talk about the definition of bullying and how it differs from one-time incidents of mistreatment. We're going to talk about how being bullied impacts the mental health of children, and we will talk about how you can help. And just to note that bullying is really about power. And the hard truth is, for a lot of us as parents, if we happen to be parenting children who are being bullied or have been bullied, is that both the bully and the person being bullied are negatively affected and impacted by the bullying. Bullying helps no one, and the child who is doing the bullying is also at risk in my mind as a child therapist. And so there are children who are vulnerable to being bullies or acting in this way. And then there are children who are vulnerable to being bullied by other children. And then there are children who are vulnerable to both. And I also want to put a caveat in that this just doesn't just exist in childhood, that this exists through the lifespan, right? Starting from when we become social beings, that one person targets another for a variety of reasons. So I do know that this is ultimately a national forum. I'm coming at it from Massachusetts, and you can absolutely look up for your own state what your state's definition of bullying is. And I think the reason to talk about this is because I think the states have very distinct definitions of what bullying is. So when we use that word, they are thinking of something very, very specific that goes beyond a one-time mistreatment of somebody. So in Massachusetts, bullying is the repeated use by one or more students or by a member of a school staff, including but not limited to an educator, an administrator, school nurse, cafeteria worker, custodian, bus driver, coach, advisor, paraprofessional, of a written, verbal, or electronic expression or physical act or gesture or any combination directed at a victim that, one, causes physical or emotional harm to the victim or damage to the victim's property, 2, places the victim in a reasonable fear of harm to himself or of damage to their property, 3, creates a hostile environment at school for the victim, and 4, infringes on the rights of the victim at school or materially and substantially disrupts the education process or the orderly operation of a school. And so I just want to make it clear that to meet the definition of bullying, I've worked with many parents who their child is not feeling good about some interactions in school, and parents go in and say, my child is being bullied. And then the school, and we're going to talk a little bit about this, the school does an investigation and comes back and says it doesn't meet the requirements of the legal definition of bullying. And that can be really frustrating as parents. It doesn't mean you have no recourse. It just means that it doesn't necessarily meet that criteria. I also wanted to define hostile environment is when a situation in which bullying causes the school environment to feel really intimidating to the child. The ridicule or insult is really severe and pervasive and really changes the course of your child's education. But again, it's about the repeated targeting of a child. Cyberbullying also has its own definition, and I'm going to pick out some bits and pieces of this. This was not around when I was a child because we didn't have the internet back then, and we didn't have cell phones, and we didn't have the capacity to to treat each other poorly in this sort of way. And I think what can be especially scary about cyberbullying is that those of us who are parents now, many of us grew up in a time when this wasn't the case. And our familiarity with what goes on online is less than the amount of information our children know about how to maneuver online. And so it's almost like there's this, or it is like there's this world in which our children can exist without us understanding what they have access to and who is in contact with them. So cyberbullying is bullying, again, that targeted and repeated maltreatment of a child through the use of technology or electronic communication. And I'm just moving the pictures around so I can read the rest. Whoops. Hold on one second. So this includes creation of a web page or a blog in which the creator assumes the identity of another person. I've seen this happen where children in schools have assumed the identity of somebody who works in a school and have created a website that looks like it was made by a teacher who was doing not so great things, right? Same thing can happen between students. The knowing impersonation of another person, posting content or messages, et cetera, et cetera. So I do think it's really important that we sort of keep tabs on where our kids are online and who they're talking to as best as possible. So my child just started high school this year, and it does get harder and harder to know who your kids are interacting with. So all schools in the state of Massachusetts have to create a plan that addresses bullying in their school. And the plan needs to include procedures for reporting bullying, how reports are responded to and investigated, disciplinary measures, and how the victims will be helped. And the school may not be able to tell you, the parent or guardian of the bullied student, the specifics of the disciplinary measures on the child who did the bullying. Of note, on IEPs, there's actually an assessment on whether the child who is on the IEP may be vulnerable to being bullied or to bullying. And there's a legal arm of this, at least in Massachusetts, where harassment prevention orders may be obtained from court if it gets to that degree. One important note about phones that I wanted to talk a little bit about, because I think a lot of parents don't realize this, but if a child sends words or pictures to another child that are obscene, pictures of themselves, pictures of their own private parts, right, or their own bodies without clothing, that they could be breaking the state law regarding child pornography. And if this is even the case, if the two children involved are in a dating relationship, so if they are underage and sending nudes of themselves, children and families could be held accountable for this, which is really scary to think about, right? Right? Because we know a lot of kids are doing this now, and I'm not sure how much that's shared actually with the kids that are doing this, that it could be a problem. I want you also to think about, as we talk about bullying, which is this repeated targeting of an individual, as we move into talking about how bullying impacts kids and sort of what to look for if you think your child may be being bullied, I want you to recall, just take a minute and recall one time in which somebody said something negative about you, just one time, right? Could be when you were a child, Could be as an adult, as a teen, right? Just one time. And I bet you the folks that are watching here today can all remember one time when one person said one thing, right, that has stayed with you. And my question to you is, did you internalize that message? Did you believe it inside of yourself? And did you begin to question yourself or your abilities and your worth, right? So when I was in high school, I remember there was a teacher who told me that I would never be successful because I was too shy, or there was something about me being shy and not being successful, right? And there's a lot of high school and a lot of middle school that I don't remember, but I do remember that teacher, right? And that is because our brains are made so that we tend to remember, it's called negativity bias. We tend to remember the bad things. They just sort of stick around in our brain. And I could have been told that same week that that teacher said that, I could have been told 20 amazing things about myself. And what my brain tends to hold on to are the negative messages from others. And it's not just my brain, it's everybody's brain. So when we talk about children being bullied, signs you can look for, the most important thing when we're talking about children and mental health and their emotional well-being is, do you notice a definitive, definite change in your child's presentation? So were they going along in one way and then seem to take a sharp right or left-hand turn in terms of their functioning, right? And so when I am working with kids, I am looking for a kid who used to be really optimistic is suddenly very pessimistic, right? A child who used to like going out with their friends, who suddenly doesn't like going out with their friends, right? So as a clinician, as a therapist, I'm always sort of tuned into that. Um, and there are kids who are like little Eeyores, right? That they're sort of pessimistic by nature, right? And there are kids who aren't as bubbly as other kids, right? And just because that is who they are doesn't mean that there's something wrong going on. So I'm talking about changes in presentation. If you know your child to act in a certain way and then suddenly they are acting in a very different way, that's when the flags go off in my head. So you're going to be looking for changes in your child's presentation, like physical bruises, cuts, scratches, missing property, increased stomach aches, headaches, trouble sleeping, and stopping of self-care, things like brushing of the teeth or bathing, things like that. They may not want to attend school. They may not want to go on field trips. They may sort of revert to sitting alone or staying close to teachers or having trouble with schoolwork and stop taking part in activities. The emotional impact of this can be anxiety, isolation, becoming angry and irritable, tearful, poor confidence, and lashing out, and for slightly older kids, drug and alcohol use. And I think kids turn to drug and alcohol use because it changes the experience of the way that they feel, right? It can work really fast and really effectively, except we know that it's not good for them. What bullying does is the same thing that a lot of other things that are potentially traumatic do. Bullying takes away the victim child's agency or ability to just be in the world and do as they wish, right? And so I'm going to share another personal story. So when it was in the 1970s, so it was a long time ago, but I used to walk home from school with this friend of mine, Michelle, and there was this little two boys, Luke and Tom, and they used to hide behind a bush and hit us as when we were walking home, right? And so the walk for us became suddenly Michelle and I were trying to figure out, other ways of getting home, right? We were trying to figure out how we were going to alter our lives because they had taken away the safety that we felt walking home. Bullying causes your child's life to be smaller. So suddenly, on my way home from school, I had to arrange to get home in other ways, right? I couldn't be free with my movement. The messages of the bully may be internalized and believed by the child. Again, I want you to think about that sort of bias that our brains have for sort of holding on. It's like sticky paper, holding on to negative messages that we receive. And finally, the bullied child may live with a nervous system. So the thing inside of ourselves that protects us from danger, that alerts us if a tiger is coming around the corner, right? That same internal system is going to be activated in the face of a bully. And the longer you live in that sort of activated system, the longer that activated system sort of sticks around, right? And you exist in this heightened, like, oh, I don't know what's going to happen next. And that makes it harder to learn. It makes it harder to be social. It makes it harder to stay healthy, both mentally and physically. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what you can do as parents. So talking about bullying, it one of the hardest things I think about being a parent is seeing your child in any sort of pain, right? What it brings out in us as parents and guardians, is our own fight and flight response, right? Our own trauma response, our own. I remember when my child was, gosh, she's a freshman in high school now, but she was about 5, I think, maybe 4. And we were at a birthday party, and there were some slightly older children there. They were probably about um I don't know, 7 maybe, and the 7-year-olds, there was a group of them, about 4 or 5 of them, and they had an iPad, and they were watching something on the iPad, and they were in this little circle, and my kid came over to them, 4 years old, right, and wanted to see what was on the iPad, and they all turned their back on my kid. And my kid won't remember, doesn't remember this event, but I remember instantly I was flooded with the desire to rescue my child from these 7-year-old kids and yell at them or something. Like, I was worked up, right? Um, and and that was a relatively minor incident, right? It was just a quick second of kids turning their back on my kid, right? So I really want to validate that talking with your child about their pain, I think, is one of the hardest things that we can do as parents, because it's almost like it's our pain as well, right? So I just want to validate that talking with your kids about the harm that's coming to them is a really tough thing to do and maintain any sense of presence and sanity when you do it. All right. So if you're feeling overwhelmed about talking to your kids about this or about your response, what you're feeling is really, really normal. Try to talk to your child in a quiet, comfortable space or at a time when your child is rested and relaxed. If both of you are up here, if you're shaking, if your child is shaking, that's not necessarily the time for the conversation, right? It really needs to happen at a time when folks are just a little bit more relaxed than that. ask them general questions about school, open-ended questions. What did you do at lunchtime today? How do you feel about going to school tomorrow? If you could change one thing about school or other kids, what would it be? And give your child full attention and listen carefully. And remember, remember to breathe, right? I've had so many conversations with my child and have forgotten to breathe. You're going to have this in a really gentle way if you can, and keep asking them that your desire is going to be to fix it, and you can't necessarily in that moment fix it. I think it's a really common desire for parents to want to fix everything that is potentially harmful for their children, and that's natural and normal. But in this moment of listening, you're going to keep asking them about their experience of it. So what happened next and what did you do then? You're going to summarize the problem, but try not to solve it, right? Especially in that moment, because really this is just a conversation about what their experiences are. So Sam takes your lunch and throws it away, and it has happened 3 times this week, and Sam said other people should too. And again, it's easier said than done. Stay calm, even if the situation is upsetting, which is it's going to be. And if you feel angry and anxious, wait until you feel calmer before you talk with your child or others. Again, if that's possible. If there's imminent danger and you have to act, you have to act. Let your child know that it's natural to feel upset about this. I'll talk a little bit more about validating their feelings in one of the next slides. Let your child know that it's not their fault. For example, it didn't happen because you wear glasses, that that's not an excuse for it, that your child's existence, right? That if your child has a skin color that's different from the bully, or it has a different sexual orientation that has to do, like, that is not why the bullying is occurring. It's not occurring because of what your child is wearing. It's not occurring because of how your child is acting or their learning styles or issues or whatever. It is occurring because of something inside of the child who is doing the bullying. You can explain why some children bully. This might help your child understand that bullying isn't their fault. So, for example, Sam might have been upset about things at home. Sam might not know how to be nice to other people, or Sam might not realize that bullying is wrong. And avoiding, I gotta move you over. Avoiding comments like, you need to stand up for yourself, you poor thing, never mind, you can stay home. So one of so oftentimes our responses to our children are, you need to bully back, right? You need to go after this kid, right? And I can assure you that that will continue the dance here. That will continue these sort of power imbalanced interactions. Also, one of the things that also happens when children are having a tough time, and again, I understand this as a mom, I understand this. We want to take in our minds as much pressure off of our children as possible. And so we start to do things like, you don't have to go to school, or you don't have to do your homework, or you don't have to do your chores. And that's not the correct path either. All right. Moving you back down. There you go. All right, what to do next? Agree that there's a problem, right? So you're in agreement with your kid that there's a problem. Praise your child for talking with you. So one of the things that sort of gets harder as kids get older is being there, and they come to you and tell you about their lives, right? So it may happen with much more frequency in elementary school, middle school. Your knowledge of their lives and their social interaction starts to go like this. And high school, it has a tendency to go like this, right? So these kids, of yours that you once knew so much about, suddenly they have lives that aren't necessarily connected to you, and you're not sure about what they're doing. So really, your response to them coming to you and not overreacting in either way to their response is also going to determine if they're going to come to you about other things, right? So let them know that you're really happy that they told you about the bullying, and make it clear that you're going to help. This is all from a website called raisingchildren.net.au. It's an Australian website with some resources. So one of the things that determines whether or not a difficult event is going to end up being a trauma that they're going to carry forward with them into their lives, is whether or not their experience is validated by you. That you believe as their parents that they have experienced something that has been really hard for them. And oftentimes, especially with children, they might tell us something like, I had a hard day. And we might say to them, because remember, them having painful experiences is painful for us, right? And so in our own sort of way of protecting ourselves, we might say something like, oh, it wasn't too hard, right? Oh, it's not that bad, right? I do believe there's a time and a place to figure out if the problem that they're experiencing is really big or it's kind of small and we can get through it. But if they're coming to you with something like this, I think understanding that the feelings that they're having make sense given the circumstance, right? And letting them know that you know that. All right. Bring your concerns to the school. So ultimately, if that's where the bullying is happening, the school has the responsibility here to intervene, period. Um, one of the other things that I wanted to mention, that should the bullying get to a place that ultimately is traumatizing for your child, which again means that they have internalized these messages, they are feeling fearful, they are struggling. You're going to want to provide certain things for them to counteract the trauma that they've experienced. And this is true of any trauma. And these things are called protective and compensatory experiences. So when we think about kids who have been through hard times, when I'm treating kids who have been through hard things, I want to make sure that they have these following things in their life, which increases resilience, meaning they're more able to get through hard things. So unconditional love by at least one person. Events in which they can connect with other children their age, doing things to help others, engagement in a physical activity, participation in a social group, having a hobby, help them find a trusted adult who is not you. So really, it doesn't take a whole team of adults. It takes a couple of adults who can make a huge difference. And provide a clean, safe, and organized home with clear rules and expectations. So when I'm working with a child who has had a pretty horrific school experience or who's had a different kind of trauma, these are the sorts of things that I'm working to sort of put into their lives to increase their resilience. And I want to talk about something that I've been to bullying presentations before, and I haven't heard it talked about. And I think this is really important. So I in my free time I have started a practice of martial arts. I've sort of come to it sort of late in the game, but I've been at it for like 4 years now, and I do some teaching of some martial arts. And the reason why I want to bring this up is because when I teach, martial arts, here's what I notice. We teach self-defense, and consent, verbal self-defense, things like that. Okay. And I'm teaching adults. Occasionally I get the chance to teach kids. But what I've noticed about teaching kids and adults how to set like firm limits for themselves is that they and we need to be practicing doing that all the time. And the reason I say this is because kids in health class can get a lesson and the teacher can say, well, the next time the bully says something to you, you need to stand up for yourself and say, stop it, right? But the reality is, and I really want to emphasize that, that's a really hard thing to do. Um, when you're in a situation in which you feel threat, it can be really hard to summon up a response, right? When you're in that fight or flight. And what I've noticed when I'm teaching martial arts is that students will come in and I will start teaching them self-defense moves or using their voice to say no or stop. And their voices are so quiet at first. And they feel so embarrassed to say, no, no, don't touch me that way, right? Or no, you need to move away from my body, right? And over time, we practice every single week, right? We practice again. And these are adults. These are adults. Every single week, we practice and practice and practice. And finally, after months of doing this, they are able to find their voice. And when I pretend to go after them, they are able to say no to me. So I really want to emphasize that unless we're practicing with our kids to respond to things that are threats to them over and over and over again, the sort of fight or flight and those protective factors inside are going to take over, right? And they're not going to have access to their voice when they're in these situations, right? So I hope this makes sense that in order to access your voice or for your child to access their voice to begin to protect themselves and set boundaries, that is a really advanced skill that I can do better now at 54 than I could at 14, right? No question. And my practice of this has made it even easier for me. So I would love it if parents, guardians, teachers practice this on a regular basis when children are calmer and can take it in, because that's how they're going to find their voices in a moment of threat. All right. So, questions?
Thank you so much,
I'm gonna
Alice. That was
stop.
incredible. I really loved your personal stories. I mean, the information was so valuable, but the personal touch that you added, that you shared things that you experienced and things that you've tried and things that have worked, and just really connecting it to yourself made it really, really poignant for me. So thank you for that. I do have some questions for you.
Yes.
And these are questions that we sort of gathered from social media from parents, and then we sort of pulled together and figured out. And some of them you already answered, which is great.
Yep.
We appreciate. But I do have one that came up that what is the relationship between bullying and school shootings, and is there?
That's a great question. I'm not an expert on school shootings by any stretch of any imagination. They terrify me as a parent and as somebody who loves kids. And the fear that it instills in all of us, and the victims, both the shooter and the, like, it's bigger than I can comprehend. I do believe that one of the facets or one of the pieces of personality or experience of the children who end up, you know, shooting other children is isolation. And whether or not actual bullying is part of that or has caused that, it wouldn't be shocking to me, right? It wouldn't be shocking. You know, I suspect that there is trauma involved, isolation, um, needs that haven't been tended to. Um, and so, you know, I'm not, Victor, expert enough in this topic to be able to answer this question, but I would make an educated guess that sure, sure. Um, I think, but what I don't know the answer to is whether the kids who do shoot are ones who would have been bullies or the bullied. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if any of you know, but but I do know that isolation is a factor, that they often are talked about as being sort of alone and different. So that's my best guess.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Because I've heard different things and you sort of put the pieces of the puzzle that I needed for that. So thank you. It was really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I think also, uh, you know, I think it has to do with access to guns. I think it has to do, I mean, it has to do with a lot of things, right? There's questions about race that I have. It seems like many of the shooters fit a very similar profile. And so I don't know sort of where anger starts and finishes, where racism is, you know, where what I, you know, I think it's a complex mix of things. And I think bullying could potentially be in the mix. I wouldn't be surprised if it is.
Thank you. You talked a little bit about cyberbullying, of course, and but I wanted to know like how, because now children are have devices at such a young age. Um, how young does cyberbullying start? You know, like is it like kindergartners? Like is
I
that
mean, you know, I think, I think kids have, worlds that we think we know what's going on in our kids' worlds, and we think we know what they know, but they know more than we think they do,
Mm,
right? I'm always struck by this. I'm a big believer in truth telling to children because they already know, right? They already know. And so, you know, I would assume as a parent and as a child therapist that as soon as phones are in the hands of children, um, they are like the rest of us, right? And they will engage in behaviors on phones that older and younger children do. Like I would just expect that once a child has access, you know, and okay, so I'm going to say something sort of maybe controversial. I don't know if it's controversial, but we got our child a phone at a fairly young age, and we um did that with the knowledge of who our child is. And I've worked with kids who do fine with phones, and I've worked with kids who don't do fine with phones. And I've also worked with communities of kids who, especially during the lockdown, their access to other kids was life-saving. Their access to things on the internet was life-saving. And so I don't want to, in this presentation, present phones as being evil or present, existing in the cyber world as being evil, because I think it's more nuanced than that. However, I just assume that if we're talking about cyberbullying, it can start, I would imagine, with somebody being left off of a group chat, right? Or there's one group chat with the person, but then there's another group chat without the person, without the child, and, sort of insidious things starting in that way. And then just growing from there as kids get more sophisticated with picture taking and videos and whatever, TikToks and things that it's like this entire planet, the cyber planet that those of us of a certain age just don't have as much access to because we didn't grow up with it. And so it can feel sort of scary, like we're sending our children off to this world, yeah.
Can I ask a question just to piggyback off of the cyberbullying?
Sure.
Because my son is on the autism spectrum,
Huh?
and kiddos, most kiddos on the spectrum, they really don't know about boundaries, and sometimes they just go into this world and just survive.
Sure.
How is there a correlation of, and this is my biggest fear as well as a mom with a kid with a
Sure.
disability,
Yeah.
being different and being bullied. And despite, like, sometimes you definitely will see stuff in his behavior if he was being bullied, but he's 7. Like, I'm just trying to find the correlation between and kids on the spectrum or any other disabilities. Is that a big thing? Is there, I'm just trying to see if there's a correlation, because there's going to be bullying because a kiddo is different. But in terms of having a significant disability and a kid that doesn't understand boundaries, and when they're being teased, or if they're, a group of kids telling them to go do something that he's not supposed to do, kind of not understanding those boundaries.
Yeah,
Does
for sure.
that make sense?
It makes total sense.
Okay.
I think that's why in Massachusetts, is part of our IEP, part of plans for kids who have, moderate to significant disabilities. One of the
Okay.
questions on the IEP is this child more vulnerable to being bullied? And if
Ah,
so, what are the things that we need to do to put in place? And so I work with some of my clients have pretty moderate, edging towards more severe developmental stuff going on, and autism, and a whole bunch of other things, right?
mhm,
And we do have to uh, oftentimes be much more explicit in our training of the child to recognize what mistreatment is versus,
okay.
and do you know this person? Do you not know this person? We're going to limit, your screen, we're going to go in and not let you have access to certain, sure, right?
Right.
Because, and every kid I see is different, regardless of whether, you know, there's a disability or not, in terms of
Mhm,
their susceptibility um to thinking that they're in a group, that they're being accepted by
right.
people, right? And really they're not. And even kids who are kind of savvy socially can be lured into some stuff,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I think the thing, in terms of your specific question, I think you're gonna have to be much more sort of um concrete, right? So you might be able to say to one child, when you get that funny feeling in your belly that something's sort of not right, and if you don't have a kid who gets those funny feelings, your child may
Hmm.
or may not, but right, or
Hmm.
be more susceptible, you're going to have to spell it out, right? That these are the people that you should be talking to online, and let me know if there are other people around, or right? You're going to have to keep more oversight, I think.
Okay.
But then on the flip side, right, a number of the kids on my caseload who do have more oversight and more explicit teaching are actually in better shape than those other kids who we assume they know what they're doing, right?
Right.
Like we assume that they're going to let us know if
Yeah.
somebody's doing something online.
Right. Right. Thank you.
Yeah, of
Thank
course.
you.
Thank you so much. I think we're gonna have one more question and then we'll wrap up.
Okay.
I have one, but if somebody else has one, I don't want to cut them off either.
I have one, but Victor, you go. You because
Are you
Yeah, I
sure?
can talk really fast.
or we could both throw them in the air and see which one feels more like
Okay,
relevant. But you go, Victor.
okay.
Mm.
Um, I'm always curious about this. So with my own child, and just how do we support your child in being an upstander instead of a bystander? And I'm always trying to tell my child, like, oh, if someone is being teased, like, you can interrupt, you can stop this by just, if one person just says something, you'll interrupt it. Is that true? Is that wrong information to give? Like,
It's
I'm
not
just,
it's not wrong information. Oh, sorry. So Megan, you do
Oh,
yours.
I love that question so much. I think
Okay.
I
So
love it. My
I'm
question was just like if
okay. So it's a great question because this is another one of those times when we say to kids, well, if you see something, say something, right? And it's sort of a one-off, right? I've been in situations out in public where I've seen something and I'm like scared to like say something, right? I'm like, this doesn't feel right. I'm just going to go over here, right? I'm just, and I'm a full grown adult, right? So I do think this is where we can't just say, see something, say something. We need to actually help kids go through the motions of pretending to see something and saying something, right? And we need to practice that because it's a really tall order. It's taller than we make it seem, right? We make it seem like, well, if your friend's getting bullied, just step in, right? And like that's really hard. I mean, there's social strata that are involved, and there's like potential repercussions, and there's lots of, I was talking to a student when I got the request from Megan to do this training, and I said, "What would you say about?" And this is a sixth grader, seventh grader, and he said, "Sometimes it's not worth it to stand up for somebody else." And because of the repercussions on you. And so I do think we really need to sort of break it down. And if you're going to say to a kid, you need to stand up for your friends, you're going to have to, it's a skill. It's a skill. And you're going to need to practice doing that. Like in my martial arts, we actually practice calling somebody names, and that person has to respond, and the people around them have to step in, right? So that we work that muscle. It's a muscle. And if we don't teach kids how to do it, it would be like me saying to Megan, who doesn't know the times tables, Megan, just multiply. Right?
Yep.
Like, I don't know how to multiply, right? Well, I just said multiply. Well, I don't know how to multiply, right? Just say something, right? Kids don't necessarily know how to say something or who to say it to, right? If they don't want to get directly in the sort of fray.
right.
Hey, thank you, Alice. I really appreciate your words of wisdom, and it makes me think about I'm a teacher that works with special education students, and just this idea of practicing these skills, because I'm with you. I've been in some situations where I had a hard time speaking up as an adult, and to expect kids to do that on their own, it's really challenging. I love validation. I think that's, leading with love is always good. Good boundaries is something that we all should practice. And I think the key word though in all of this, my big takeaway is practice. And you're exactly right. We aren't able to do it if we haven't practiced it. So
Yeah, because our voices shake, right? Our voice.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, and we've all had the adult bully, or we've all experienced that. So just a reminder, parents, that the first Tuesday of every month we have a parent learning series event. Our next month event will be on the 7th of November, and the topic is advice from young people on how to best support their mental health journey. And then next Tuesday, which I didn't get the date down, but I think it's the 8th or 9th. 9th? Yes.
8th, maybe?
It's the 8th. Yes, next Tuesday, the 8th. We have an elementary group for parents and just caregiver conversations that you can join in on. We have both Eastern and Pacific Standard Times. They'll be at 7 p.m. And then the third Tuesday of the month is a conversation for parents on the same topic, for middle and high school parents. And then finally, our last Tuesday of the month is our BIPOC affinity space, where we'll again talk about this topic of bullying. And then we'll start again next month with a new topic on the 7th of November. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. And thanks so much, Alice.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You, Alice.